right? Everyone's here.
We're still waiting for Warren.
Yeah, Warren's the only person I believe that's left.
Hey, uh, I guess we're ready to start. Yeah, I think we're going to start anyway. If he comes in and joins,
I'll shoot him a quick email right now.
Okay, thank you. So Trisha, are we broadcasting?
Yep, it just went.
Okay, great. All right, so I call this workshop meeting to order to go over the consultant reports. And I just want to also note that we are continuing this under the to do this remotely under the executive order 202.38 that the governor released the other day. Continuing the open meetings exceptions till July 6th at the moment. So, all right. Sarah, do you want to go first or Ray?
I think it might make sense to have Ray start, and then we can sort of summarize again sort of our conclusions and then the process to kind of kick off the discussion. If that makes sense, Ray.
Sure, and everyone got the memos from everyone, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Able to look at them and
Yes,
read them?
Yeah, great. You should have a memo from Ray's office and then a memo from our office from BFJ. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So pursuant to the last planning board meeting that took place, there was a lot of discussion about the process and the project as a whole. And the task for our office was to take a look at the information that was submitted by the applicant in Chazen as far as their pre-sketch plan materials and to review them for accuracy, if you would. And keep in mind, we were primarily looking at the areas associated with wetland areas, steep slopes, things of that nature. So for us, let me just go through. For us, what we had started with was Chazen had provided our office with CAD drawings that provided the polygons and things of that nature that outlined all of the wetland areas that were mapped, all of the steep slopes that were identified. And AutoCAD actually does that where AutoCAD itself, the program, can calculate those slopes and identify exactly where those slopes are and mark them accordingly. So they provided us with that information, and our office had gone through and verified the mapping and verified the areas. In addition to that, one of the things that they submitted, Chazen that is, one of the things Chazen had submitted was a set of Excel spreadsheets, and I've included those within my correspondence of June 5th. So the reason I did that is I felt that that was good information for the planning board members to have. It provides a good background to see the extent and the process that Chazen had gone through in preparing their documentation. So to start off, I just want to remind everybody that the pre-sketch plan process and the mapping is based on available data and available information to the applicant. In this case, it would be DEC maps, federal wetland maps and so forth associated with the wetlands, okay? And then obviously they've gone out and they've done survey information and aerial surveys as it pertains to obtaining data on the steep slopes. As the process is to move forward, I want to make sure that everybody understands that the results and the acreages that we're looking at will change. So for instance, they've mapped the wetlands. As of yet, they have not done detailed studies as it pertains to the extents of the federal wetlands and the DEC wetlands as far as actually going out, flagging each one of those, having a surveyor locate each one of the flags, and submitting a formal map to the Department of Environmental Conservation and also to the Army Corps of Engineers, that they review that map, they actually go out into the field and they concur to the extent of the wetlands. So that process has not taken place as of yet, but will take place during the draft environmental impact statement process as further reporting is done and further studies are done. So that's an example. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understands when they're coming up with their lot count, and I think I used this with in a meeting that we had previously, it's a placeholder for them. But as they move forward, and as Chazen even identified within their own correspondence, that lot number may change as new data becomes available, okay? So for instance, one of the items that has not been dealt with as of yet, but will as we move forward, are the endangered species, okay? So endangered species and habitats, as far as anything that's been identified by DEC, nothing's on record right now as far as identifying the extent of any of those habitats. But again, as with the PAST project, for anyone that was involved or remembers the PAST Carvel project, there were extensive studies that were done, and we would oversee and take a look at the studies that are done by Chazen and their professionals to see whether anything becomes mapped and identified, and then that becomes part of the formula as well. Because right now, there are no portions that have been identified in the information that they've been provided. Not saying that that won't change as we move forward. Okay, so yes, Jane.
Was that done for the previous version? Because they did have extensive studies for the DEIS. And they may want to just use those, at least for the land that's already covered.
Well, they're going to be moving. So they're going to be moving once it was done in the previous application. Absolutely.
Right.
There were extensive studies, no question about it. But quite honestly, those studies are so old at this point. It's been quite a bit of time has lapsed since that last application. They would have to be redone anyway.
Okay.
And they fully anticipate moving forward in that manner of having to do those additional studies. So it's not as though they're trying to, get away from doing those studies, Jane.
Right.
Again, as we move forward, it is anticipated that we would go into a draft environmental impact stage. Prior to that, there would be a scoping document that would be developed and so forth. That would outline all the studies that need to be done and verifying, again, items such as the wetlands and habitats and things of that nature also.
In terms of my email that I sent around about the bald eagles, the actual number that were cited on the day before I went was 28 bald eagles at the south end of Carvel Lake. And the next day there were, when I was there, about 12 or 13. It's hard to count them all because they're moving and.
No, so completely understood. Yeah. So that'll be, part of the continued process. No question.
And I think just to jump in, I think it's a good time to maybe talk about process and where we are in this. As you all know, your process is a bit unique in terms of how you approach conservation subdivision with this pre-sketch process, which is great because it sort of sets the stage, sort of at a maximum what the unit count is going to be. But now sort of the next step for all of you is to find some comfort level with the base residential yield that was presented and the open space map, and then sort of allow the applicant the opportunity now to go back and prepare a sketch plan. We're still all operating without really any detailed information about what their lots will look like, how big they may be, where the resort piece fits into all of this. And until we get past this first pre-sketch hurdle, we can't really get to any of that information. And to Ray's point about seeker, we can't begin seeker until you get through this pre-sketch process. And the State Environmental Quality Review Act, in addition to sort of having scoping and setting the stage and looking at habitat and doing these surveys, will also look at alternatives. There may be other reasons that you want to have a lower density alternative. You know, through the process, we may identify some endangered species, other habitats that need to be protected, and the unit count will go down. But there may be other impacts to infrastructure or community services or some other thing that may necessitate a reduced unit count as well. And until we get into the secret process, we're just not going to know those things. And so I think, to steal your thunder, Ray, both Ray's recommendation and BFJ's recommendation is really to sort of move on from pre-sketch. You know, both of our offices are comfortable with the information presented as presented, with the great caveat that this is all subject to change per the environmental review process.
Yeah, to Sarah's point, our office and we do feel comfortable with the methodology that was utilized, the data that was submitted, and we feel comfortable for the planning board to, at this point, move forward with an understanding of 223 parcels at this time, allowing the applicant to start preparing their actual sketch and preparing their layout. And as Sarah has indicated, and as Chazen has acknowledged in their own correspondence to the planning board, that this is a starting point and that the lot number may change and probably will change as we move forward.
Yeah, so I think to mention that the two things for you, for your regular board meeting, you know, to follow your code suggests that the planning board first has to just give as a preliminary reading on the base residential yield, which they've asked for the 233 units, which Ray has checked. And then secondly, that the conservation resource map that they presented is in a preliminary fashion okay with the board. If the board were to say okay to those two things, it then allows them to do a sketch plan map. And as soon as they do that, they enter seeker. So that's where all the habitat, all the past studies will come in. And they acknowledge that they're prepared to do a full EIS once they get to that step. So the way your zoning code is written, the first steps for the board is to make sure you're okay with the base residential yield of 223 units. And then secondly, you're okay with that conservation resource map that they submitted, which, you know, outlines steep slopes, wetlands, and so on. So those are the two
And I
items.
think it's important to note that this step does not in any way, is not you in any way granting them approval of that base residential yield or that resource map. This is not an approval as much as it's accepting what they've presented and allowing them to move forward. You know, this does not entitle them to anything at this stage. And I think that's important to just be aware of.
Yeah, I like Ray's word of, if you were to move forward on this, you're giving them a placeholder. It's a placeholder of 223 units that they would then have to test. And you, the board, you have to go through a whole EIS on that. So that 223 they know could change, but they have to start. You're saying, okay, is this a reasonable place to start? So that's the key. And then is this a reasonable open space, you know, map, a conservation resource map? So I think those are the two items for your regular planning board meeting. I think Mike was feeling you should have this meeting ahead of time in case you had detailed questions or, you know, any questions on Ray's on how they got the 223 units or any questions on process. So that was the purpose, is having this workshop meeting.
You have an open question also in terms of the numbers because of the Carvel lots from previously that the town board ultimately has to decide on. And I'm really confused about how that goes into the planning.
So that will be for them sort of in the next step of this process. They can't, again, submit for that density credit for re-subdivision until they move through this pre-sketch process. They will do that as part of the sketch plan. That has to be in the environmental review, whatever that approval or authorization for those units will be. So that's an application they make to the town board seeking some density credit. We don't know at this stage what they will ask for. We know that there were 100 and I believe it's 176, no, it's 176 units. It's 200 and something units that were approved at some point there, but they're not entitled to any of those. And that is at the discretion of the town board with a recommendation from the planning board. So that's yet to come.
Okay,
And that would then have the potential of just about doubling the density
The potential.
the
Yeah,
project.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I was just gonna say, I think the thing to note is while there is the potential, they are not entitled to that density. And then we would even note further that if you look at the plans that were submitted, many of the lots in that subdivision, they've identified as having, conservation resources on them. Frank, I don't know if you want to walk the board through your thoughts on how a reasonable estimate might be made.
I think
and what
you,
you
the
might
planning
recommend.
board, you, the planning board, are going to play a key role because they have acknowledged
In conversation with us, what we've put and Sarah's put in our letter to you, that the density credit determination is at the sole discretion of the town board based on a referral to you, the planning board. So the way your code's written, you, the planning board, have a right to recommend a density if you like. You don't have to, but if you wish to the planning board, to the town board. So the applicants recognize they're not entitled to any past number. By the way, we pursued this quite a bit with them and with Warren. We wanted to know from Warren if our read of this was correct. And that is that, the previous Carvel subdivision doesn't bring with it some number that they're entitled to. It doesn't bring any entitlement to them. And there's a practical acknowledgement that I guess there's about 11 or 12. I'm not sure you the board members may know this better than I do, but there's about 11 or 12 units, I guess, that actually exist out now. So the town board, on the one hand, may want to recognize those or give them some, credit to that extent, but the town board doesn't have to give any credit, or on the other extreme, they could give the full credit. We have at the appropriate moment, or you could hear it now, I mean, we have a thought about this that could be a recommendation from us to you if you want. It's just a very preliminary thought right now, and that is, I'll just put it in just an issue for discussion, and that is, if you or if the town board were to give them some credit, you'd have to say, well, what is there a rational basis to giving them some credit for this, for this Sports City subdivision, I guess they call it. One justification we can think of, it's simple, and that is, since all this happened, you have a new zoning code, and the zoning code requires 5 acres for a unit. Well, if let's say to pursue that as a recommendation to the town board, and you divide the acreage in that subdivision by 5 acres, I think you get about 50 units or
I think
so.
it's 35.
35, is it
Something
35,
like that.
Sarah? You get about 35 units. So if you added that to the 233 units, that's considerably different, in other words, than doubling it. You'd have the 233 plus the 35. So it comes out to somewhere around 250 something.
But
units.
could the town board ask Durst to do an evaluation of that property, taking into consideration steep slopes and wetlands, just as they have on the rest of the property, on that 176 acres?
It could,
Yes.
Yes, we
right,
could.
which could bring that
Is that
number
what
down
reduce that
further.
number down to something. Okay.
Correct.
And the
So
density, one more question. The density credits would have, if they were given for that 176 acres, would those lots have to be on the 176 acre? They could be distributed in the other. Okay.
Yeah, so they can preserve the conservation lands on that 176 acres and then have them elsewhere.
Okay.
And we don't know yet at this stage what the applicant is planning. We have asked that question and they did not commit to whether they were going to seek a density credit or not. So that I think is, is an open question and one that will get answered as we move forward, because we have to know that information as we go into seeker.
Yeah.
In terms of alternatives and the scope and other things.
I think it's reasonable to expect that they will try to get some density credit, if only to cover the, 11 or 12 units that are already built there. But we don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see on that.
What I wanted you to know is we do feel that the town has, through the town board and your board, a pretty powerful tool here. The zoning code gives the town board discretion to give no credits if it wanted to, or to give some, look for a rational basis, such as what's built, the 11 or 12 units, or what I just reviewed with you all, to give them some credit. We don't know whether how they're going to. We don't know what they're going to come in with, but they can't come in with anything until they're through this first process of your two determinations on the number of units and the open space map.
Can I say something? When I'm the density credit, one thing about the process that just makes me a little, not nervous, but if we knew what the plan was, we'd be able to judge the density credit better. Kind of like what Dick was saying, it's not going to be on that land. It's going to be in other places, how they set up, right? That is one thing about this that's a little hanky, is that, if we knew what kind of cluster or whatever they were going to do would, help inform us to make that recommendation.
Well, Chairman, you won't be making that recommendation until you have a plan.
We will have a plan at that time.
You will need, yes, you will need a plan, because they need to
Okay.
demonstrate where those units are going. And even if the sequence is a little off where they submit that a little bit in advance of their sketch plan, you need to have all of that information as part of the seeker review. And the determination on the density credit doesn't actually get approved until seeker is complete. So there's a little bit of a balance. They're going to have to study that density credit through the seeker process, and it may get whittled down. It may, they may start with something larger and then through the process. So that, that will be in play a little bit
We have 30 days to put our recommendation.
to make your recommendation, correct?
So we can't really wait for that.
Well, what's going to happen though, Mike, I think, is that they can't submit anything until you make these two preliminary determinations. Then they would have to submit a sketch plan. And while they can go to the planning board, the town board is not under an obligation unless your zoning code, I would defer to Warren and you on this, unless your zoning code actually gives the town board X days to make a decision. However, what Sarah's pointing out is that once they enter the subdivision process and once they enter seeker says that you can't make a final decision on things until the seeker process is finished. So I think you're going to have, I think you're not going to have to make final sort of decisions on this until sometime in certainly 2021. It won't be this year because just to get through an EIS, which they've acknowledged they will do. In other words, they agree they have to do one. I've not seen an EIS be able to be completed inside of 8 months.
It's going to be longer than that.
Now, all of this.
And
year.
we anticipate that they're going to need several months to prepare the sketch plan. We've had no indication from them that they we may be surprised, but we're not anticipating that they have something in the drawer that they'll submit, next week. We're anticipating it will probably be this summer, maybe into early fall before we see another submission from them. So we're going to have a bit of a pause here. And then once they resubmit, you still need to, they'll have to prepare what's called an environmental assessment form, which kicks off the seeker process. You'll need to declare your intent to be lead agency, coordinate lead agency status, which is another 30 days. Then you'll need to do scoping. Scoping is now required. That's a change. I think you did scoping on the last round, but scoping is now required. Presumably you'll have a scoping session or at least some opportunity for public comment. So scoping can add, another couple months to this, and then they need to then go and prepare the draft environmental impact statement. So I would think at the earliest, we wouldn't be seeing an EIS from them, a draft EIS, until the spring, maybe late winter.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
any real decisions, I think, they're going to be at least some time in 2021. And it's possible it could be,
into
the
2022.
process goes, late 2021 or even early 2022. So you're going to have lots of opportunities, and also the public would have opportunities in that process that Sarah just outlined. For instance, scoping for the EIS now mandatory, and the public, you can hold that scoping. You don't have to hold a session on it, but you can. And if you do, the public has, 60 days, you'll have another comment period. And all scoping does is outline EIS. And then after that, when you get the draft, you don't have to accept the draft. We expect, in fact, you will want to review the draft and, take time. You have 45 days to review it. So you may have comments on the draft. They'll then have to revise it before you go to a public hearing on the DEIS. And after that, there's an FEIS to prepare. You get a chance to review that. And then finally you go to findings, which really are your conclusion to the process. Only then, sometime in 2021 or thereafter, would you be in a position to make decisions on it. So it's going to be I think a process that'll be a while.
Does the zoning still include density credits for good things that they do? For instance, of providing affordable housing, and you're shaking your head no?
No,
Affordable
so there is an affordable housing code, and that again is to the town board, but that allows a couple different mechanisms for how they provide the affordable housing. They can pay into a fund, they can build it off site, they can do it on site, and that's 10%. It's unlikely, and given the circumstances, that they would probably provide the affordable housing on site. They may choose to do it in one of the hamlet centers. And that is another process that we don't know what they're proposing at this stage. But in terms of the other things that were allowed through the NND process, there aren't other density bonuses or credits. They really are limited to that 5,000 square feet, 5 acre zoning requirement.
And I think that's very important. It's a good question, because that's one of the big differences with a conservation subdivision in that old NND. The NND did give them, I think it was Warren's view, I'm getting this partly from Warren, that it did give them quite a few ways to get some benefits and density increases. And those aren't present in the conservation development provisions that they have filed under.
That's correct.
In fact, at that first meeting we were at, I was surprised that Jennifer withdrew her previous application. And I just whispered to Sarah at that meeting, I haven't seen that much an attorney doing that, because they've given up all rights to those previous bonuses or abilities that they had under the previous zoning. And she's acknowledged that. So I think that's another positive to this, but Warren's on, so I will defer to Warren on this, but that was my read of it.
No, it's correct. I was a little surprised that they withdrew that also, but
Yeah.
the NND is much more generous in terms of density credit than a conservation subdivision.
Would there be a way for us to open up a line of communication with Mylan? Because they're part of this project too. And Durst has said Mylan doesn't have the same process, but it's important to us. I mean, where the resort gets sited, is it gets sited in Mylan or Pine Plains, has tax implications for both towns. Mylan could say, oh, we'll allow them to do 150 houses right on the border with where we're trying to keep it on a different scale. So how do we do that?
Well, when they submit their application, after this process is finished, then Mylan will be included in the process. They'll be an involved agency, so they will be intimately involved with the selecting of the lead agency, which I'm hoping will be the planning board. But theoretically, Mylan could vie for lead agency status in this. And at that time, they would be we would do a a coordinated seeker review of the process and a coordinated review of the subdivision process in both towns. So they will be involved then. We can't involve them now because this is a pre-sketch process which doesn't exist in Mylan. So there's no reason why Mylan cannot share the information that we already have. We could provide that to the town if they want to see it, but at this point, they're not involved in the process.
Okay.
Warren, what happens, how does that go if they say they want lead agency, if Mylan were to vie for that? Like what happens then?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing Mike. I don't know whether it's my connection, but it's everybody's a little fuzzy and you got to speak very loud.
I was just wondering how that process goes with the Mylan, if there becomes a dispute or if Mylan says we want lead agency, how does that go? Like, what is that?
Well, you try to work out lead agency with the town of Mylan. Ultimately, if there's a real dispute, DEC would make a determination on who the lead agency is based upon the volume of interest that each municipality has. I think it would be a no-brainer that I'm going to want to take a lead agency status. They didn't I don't remember if they did. There might have been some
I thought that they
interest shown by Mylan at that.
tried, Warren. I thought they tried to get lead agency away from Pine Plains.
Yeah.
Yeah, under seeker though, as Warren says,
So I'm not anticipating that's going to be a problem.
yeah.
I have Sarah.
Mhm.
Sarah Jones, sorry. I was wondering if our town board has had any discussions with Mylan since this process has restarted here.
Not that I know of. My recollection was that Mylan was going to be very rigorous about making them comply with the zoning that they had in Mylan that did not have very much density to it. And it would seem to me that they would not be interested in trying to get the resort, but I don't know how they are today. It was a long time ago.
And Mike, outside of, the formal process or seeker, you're always free as the planning board or, the town board could, if you want to invite Mylan to send a representative or just watch, they're always welcome to watch. And that's open to the public, or send a representative to a meeting that is open to the public, until something formal is submitted. But when something formal is submitted, as Warren said, you then have to choose who the lead agency is. But I think I've given up predicting things, but the lead agency is the agency that has the most authority, most approval authority or funding authority over an action. It would be hard for me to see Mylan, making to make that claim to the commissioner of DEC would be, I think, pretty difficult to sustain. I mean, you are clearly the agency that should be the lead agency, but hopefully you have a good relationship with them, and if you assure them they're going to be involved in everything, I would think, they would agree with you. But
Yeah, to Frank's point, if at least on the last application or during that process, I believe that there were 2 members of the planning board that actually sat with the Pine Plains Planning Board at every meeting as items were being reviewed and discussed during the seeker review. So
Well, they didn't actually come to every meeting. They kind of came initially to some, and then their attendance drifted off. But I don't know whether that was because of lack of communication from our side or from theirs.
they were invited. I do remember that they were.
They were definitely invited.
And they attended.
I think that's always a good thing to do, to invite your neighbor, because they then are not worried when they understand everything that's going on. And, quite frankly, when they understand that this is going to be a less dense development than what was previously suggested, I think they may, knowledge here, I think, is good.
Yeah, well, Mylan, I think it was Jim Jeffries participating from the town of Mylan. I don't remember, but um, Mylan was heavily involved, if I remember correctly. I think they hired Ted Fink and Green Plan, and we got some very, very detailed comments from them on the project. I don't know if they're going to go through the same board. Frank or Sarah, have you ever worked with Ted Fink?
Yes,
No, I
yes,
haven't.
and I've
Yeah.
seen Ted's memos on one or two of my projects.
He can get,
So,
he can get fairly
he's good.
detailed.
I would just say that he's good and
Yeah, he's good.
he detailed.
I work with him a lot.
Yeah, oh, okay. Yeah.
So that could happen. And I found his input pretty, sometimes over the top, but very helpful.
Yes, I think,
So
yeah,
it
and I
would be
think if
nice if we
Mylan,
had,
if
you
you
know,
see
Mylan
Mylan,
participating
or
in
they
this.
see you, they see, I mean, Pine Plains is sort of, they're working together and you're allies. I think that would be,
Right.
that Ted, if it were Ted, for instance, advising, he would understand that. He would see that right away. And so it wouldn't be a memo that was creating problems for the sake of creating them. It would be a really thoughtful memo, trying to move the project forward. I think Ted's good, but I think obviously he'll listen to his how Mylan views it.
One of the issues that came up the last time around, and I'm sure Sarah can revise what I say if she remembers it differently, but sometimes the Mylan comments came much later than the Pine Plains board needed the comments, and that was a source of frustration.
okay. Yeah. Well,
Also,
oh,
when we were dealing with Mylan, that was primarily around the first plan, over which there was a tremendous amount of controversy. So,
Right.
When we had the second plan, I think there was less of a.
Less
of a-
involvement. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
It was much less involvement with the second plan.
Mhm.
So a couple of things. First of all, I think you might be a little bit too optimistic about when we'll hear from Durst again. I would be surprised if we got something by the summer or spring. So don't anticipate that it's going to happen that quickly. I don't have any inside information on that, but my sense, it might be many months before we hear from them again. So don't get discouraged if we don't. The other thing is that it doesn't sound like we have a whole lot to do at tomorrow's meeting with regard to Durst. The one thing I wanted to do, if we're all in agreement, is to get a resolution passed proving the pre-sketch density calculations. So I've sent a copy of a proposed resolution that I worked on with Jennifer Van Tile to the consultants. If they have any comments between now and tomorrow, let me know. And then Michael, you have a copy of it also. I sent it to you. So if you could forward that to the town board, to the planning board members, so they each have a copy of that.
Warren,
And-
I didn't receive that.
You didn't?
Did you get it,
Okay.
Frank?
I did not
No.
get it.
no,
before
no, no.
Okay, she made an, she's revised it. I asked her to draft the initial one and then there were some typos. So I just got a third revised draft. I will send that out,
Okay.
but I don't have all the planning board emails, so I'm gonna send it to
problem.
Michael,
I'll
and
make
if
sure
you could
everybody-
forward it. And then I'll get this to you shortly. It's nothing controversial. I think we'll be fine. And then I don't know what else. Are you do we
Could you repeat
need
that?
to
Warren?
discuss
Warren, we just lost you.
anything else that might go on tomorrow?
Yes, we have two other items. We have two lot line adjustments. Dale.
No, I know that. I know that.
Oh, as far as
Yeah,
this,
I'm not-
as far as
I'm not
this
looking forward to
application-
Yeah, I'm talking about this application.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I mean, no, what about the map? Now that is the conservation part of it. What is it called? The conservation resource map. Is that something that just, is that part of the resolution or is that for later? Part of the seeker part.
I think that is part of the resolution
Part of the
at this time. It's similar to the lot count, the residential yield, and that
Yeah,
you're
you'll
giving it
see
a
the
nod.
Resolution. I think it addresses all that in the resolution.
Yeah, that's the second item that
You'll
you
get
need
it.
to
If
act
you have any
on.
further comments, let me know.
Right,
I have
the
a
code
que-
requires you to move on, to act on that as well. And it's sort of giving it a nod, but again, as Ray mentioned, that map will be refined through the seeker process.
Ray, in your notes, you mentioned some like scale issues and that sort of thing that you had. Is that need to be like a condition, or is that just, something you need to straighten out with them, or? what?
Yeah, that was just that. Well, so first on it just noted that they should modify the scale so that way it is correct in case anybody refers back to that particular drawing, but that's a very minor comment as far as that's concerned. And our additional comment was more towards as the planning board moves forward with future submissions by the applicant, and again, that's as more detail becomes available. All right, and that's including. It's interesting in the zoning the way it's written, and the code identifies the need for mapping out the primary and secondary conservation areas. It does not identify the need to locate and map out the prime agricultural soils or soils of state importance. However, as they proceed in this process and as they actually do their layout for where the units are going to be, that becomes very important and is a requirement of the conservation subdivision guidelines. So one of my recommendations that in future submissions by the applicant, that they actually map the prime soils and soils of state importance and provide that as an overlay as they move forward and lay out their proposed lot arrangement as far as unit arrangement. So that's just a recommendation as well. You can include that into the resolution. That might be helpful.
Sounds good to me. I don't know if anyone has a problem with that. Okay, yeah.
I would think also it might be good, Mike, tomorrow night, this may already be in the resolution, to just mention that you've had Ray has reviewed the lot count, and also we've given you a memo on the two items, the base residential yield and then the conservation resource map. We thought they were, I think we're of the same mind with Ray. We thought they were both reasonable enough for you to move forward on those so they could get into a formal process. And, as Warren said, that might take them then before you hear back from them, because they'll have to lay out a sketch plan then.
All right. Okay. So Warren, that makes sense to you to include that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What Frank just said, does it make sense to include those?
Warren, I was just saying that somebody, could mention verbally, or that could also be in the resolution, that they have had two memos from their advisors in the sense of Ray's memo and our memo. And it might be nice to have that.
It's not in the resolution, but I can add that. What I prefer to do is have you look at the resolution and then let me know what you want to add to it, and then we'll add it before tomorrow night. So
Okay.
I'd rather not do it piecemeal. So
Yeah,
take
Yeah.
a
we'll do
take a
that.
look.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, I wasn't suggesting even it had to be in the resolution. I was just thinking of what
No, I
board,
think it's a good idea.
what board members might say, or Mike might say, and you could say, hey, we've all received two memos. We just wanted everybody to know, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing, whatever.
No, I think that's a good idea. We
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
okay.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for meeting in the afternoon here, and
Yes, thank you.
we'll see everybody tomorrow night.
See you tomorrow
7:30.
night.
Great, great.
All right,
Okay,
I'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Good.
All
All
right,
right.
good, good.
yeah,
Thanks.
Good night.
bye-bye,
Thanks.
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.
We got to fix your mic there, Mike.
Okay.